So, hello and welcome to today's episode of A Slice of Medieval. We have a returning guest. Steven A McKay was born in Scotland in 1977 and has always enjoyed studying history. He wrote his excellent Forest Lord series of novels after seeing a house called Sherwood when out at work one day. Since then, he started a new series, the Warrior Druid of Britain Chronicles, the latest of which, The Vengeance of Merlin, is out now and a jolly good read. I highly recommend it. And he now co-hosts the fabulous podcast, see, I said fabulous, Rock, Paper, Swords, with fellow novelist Matthew Harvey, which complements A Slice of Medieval quite well.
Yeah, twins.
Today, he's here to talk about his Alfred the Great trilogy, which started with the Heathen Horde and continues with Sword of the Saxons. Derek and I have been wanting to do Alfred the Great for quite a while. So we've been looking around for somebody to do it. And it was like, Stephen's done an Alfred the Great series. Brilliant. Come on, Stephen, we need to talk to you. So, Stephen, what made you want to tell Alfred the Great story?
Well, I'll tell you right now, I'm not an expert in Alfred the Great, so you might have been better with somebody else.
Right, cheerio then, Steve. See you another time.
So it's been nice talking to you.
Shortest podcast on record.
And even with the first question, why did I want to write about Alfred the Great? Well, I never actually. The publisher, Canelo, emailed me and said, would you like to work with us? It was my editor, Kit Neville. And I said, well, okay, what is it you want me to write? Because I thought, I don't really want to come up with an idea. If they can do it, save me at least that work. So Kit came back and he said, well, what about Alfred the Great? And I never knew the first thing about Alfred the Great, because obviously living in Scotland, they don't teach much English history at school. So I thought, well, okay, I'll have a look at it. And I bought a couple of books, started doing the research, and I discovered that he was actually the perfect character for a trilogy. There was just so many interesting things that happened. So I immediately get back onto the email and I told Canelo that I would love to write the trilogy for them about Alfred the Great. So that's where it went from there.
Reading Bernard Cornwell's The Last Kingdom series, I thought that wasn't a great depiction of Alfred the Great. It sort of reduced his influence a little bit, his achievements.
Definitely.
And you've put him back to where he should be. I
agree with you. And I think the problem is people like me who don't know much about Alfred but are huge fans of historical fiction have probably read the Uhtred books or seen The Last Kingdom on the telly, and they just immediately think, well, Alfred the Great was a really weak man. Was he as portrayed that way in Bernard's books? It's obvious why he did it. It was so he could make Uhtred the main character and the big warrior that goes around solving problems and stuff like that. But in reality, Alfred was a much stronger character than I think Bernard portrayed him as.
Well, he'd have to be, really, with the things he went through, wouldn't he?
Exactly. And I mean, to be a king in those days, you had to be strong. You had to fight in the shield wall beside your men. You couldn't just be lying at the back going, I've got a sore tummy. But you did. You had to get up at the front.
Yeah, wasn't he the fifth of 5 brothers or something? And each one of the others had been king and died in office. So it was, you were going to be short-lived as a king unless you had something about you.
Well, exactly. He wasn't ever supposed to be king. It just, like you say, his brothers had all died before him. So he ended up kind of been thrust into the role and turned out to be best of them at it.
So he's a big character, obviously. I mean, you don't get called the Great for nothing, I suppose. So what was the biggest challenge for you in tackling that subject?
I think probably I'm more used to writing stuff that I just make up completely myself.
Yeah.
Or with the Forest Lord books, I had a kind of very basic framework and some basic characters like Little John and Robin Hood and stuff like that. Whereas Alfred the Great was a real man.
Yeah.
His wife was real. All these other supporting characters were real. I made some up for the book, just, like Uhtred style idea, just to add a bit of interest. But that was probably the biggest challenge for me, because I wasn't used to writing about real characters and real events. And, you know, the worry for me at the start was, is there going to be enough interesting things happened in Alfred's life to fill out a trilogy? And, you know, when I started writing it, I realised actually there was plenty here. You know, you could actually have continued the trilogy on with his son and other things happening, you know, England becoming England and that kind of stuff. So, although it was the greatest challenge for me because I wasn't used to working that way, ended up it was much easier than it might have been if a character had only had, you know, one book's worth of exciting events happening in his life. What would you do then? I would have had to have made 2 books worth of stuff up, really. And what would be the point in that?
Yeah. You say obviously there are a lot of real people that you're dealing with. Aside from Alfred himself, was it hard to find those other people and think, well, what were they actually like?
Yeah, that was really hard. Even things like, you knew you had to get the names of like the aldermen and the thanes correct, because there's records of who was the alderman of this area and that area. That was something you had to research and make sure you got right. But there's not really any record of what they were like as people. There's no description of them physically. There's some records of like who Alfred maybe thought of as friends and things like that. But again, there's no anything really detailed, and especially his wife. You know, there's nothing about the woman of that time period. So I just kind of had to make a lot of it up, going with the basic framework and invent certain characters.
Didn't Alfred's biographer not even name Alfred's wife? I'm sure there was a big book about Alfred and they didn't even name his wife, just called her his lady wife or something rather than giving her a name.
I don't actually remember if that was him or the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, but yeah, that is exactly the kind of thing that they did. It was just as if the women weren't important enough.
Yeah.
And obviously, Derek, as men who are married, we know that, you know, your wife is a lot more important than, you know, Alfred's biographers were ever giving them credit for.
Yeah.
You know, they're probably the real power behind Alfred. I'm sure he was getting driven on to do stuff by his wife. But that was another hard thing. But it kind of gave me scope to just invent things like events that happened that never really happened or were never recorded. So I've just kind of come up with certain characters and events to explain what really happened or was really recorded as happening. But Asser probably invented a lot himself or exaggerated a lot of stuff because it was propaganda at the end of the day. He was trying to make Alfred look even better than he was. But I think Alfred does, you know, the events do speak for themselves. And I think he definitely deserved the epithet of great.
Well, that was my next question. Do you admire King Alfred and what made him great? Or does he even deserve the accolade?
I think he does, because as time shows that he did do a lot of great things, whether Asser, you know, exaggerated the stuff or not. He invented things like the lanthorn, medieval lantern, to stop candles from blowing out in the wind. He got like a candle and surrounded it with thin slivers of bone, I believe it was, or horn, so that the wind wouldn't blow out so he could carry around a lantern. And that was Alfred. He never invented it really, because the Chinese had it for hundreds of years like they usually do, preceding us and everything. But you know, he was the first one to come up with it in England. So he did stuff like that. He was a thinker, a warrior, a scholar, like a true philosopher king, really. You know, we hold up this idea of a philosopher king.
Yeah.
Most rulers don't come anywhere near that ideal, but Alfred does seem to have come close to that. And at the end of the day, he did drive back the Vikings.
No small achievement.
Exactly.
Yeah, and he fought them back from, you know, he lost. He was a defeated king hiding in the marshes. You know, England was there for the Vikings to take. And he could have just taken boat to France and left England to it.
Especially with all his health problems, you know, he must have been like camping out in Athelney marshes after he'd been betrayed by some of his own people. And he's having these terrible stomach problems or piles and all this kind of stuff, hemorrhoids, you know. And it must have been tempting for him just to go, I've had enough of this, and just sail away, take his money and his family, big chest of silver or whatever, and just head off to a quieter place just to live out his life. But He obviously didn't. He believed that, you know, God was watching over him, and I think he probably, to be honest, enjoyed the fighting and the the rivalry with the Vikings. I think you would have to be in that kind of position and not run away.
Yeah, especially as you said. I mean, he was never intended to be king, so he could easily have said, "Oh well, enough of this. This wasn't for me anyway." But the fact that he didn't do that is significant, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, he tried different tactics, like he befriended the Vikings. Guthrum was baptized and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he definitely deserves the title Great.
Now, you mentioned his stomach problems, which sort of comes up a lot in the Uhtred books, obviously. And so I guess anyone who's read those knows that Alfred had stomach problems. Or if they don't, they weren't paying much attention. So what do we know about it? Do we know what it actually was?
Well, I don't think they know exactly what it was, because even at the time, apparently doctors had never seen anything like it. So I don't know. They think it's Crohn's disease, or it could have been irritable bowel syndrome.
Yeah.
And he also had hemorrhoids. So, I mean, he was definitely afflicted, because I don't think his biographer would have written it all down and said things like, I mean, there was one quote where Asser said he suffered constantly, not a single hour when he wasn't in pain. So why would your biographer tell the world that? Because that was seen as a big weakness. You know, when it struck him down at his own wedding, and it was seen as a terrible weakness. So you think if it was just propaganda, why would they not hide that kind of physical weakness? So I think there must have been some truth to it.
And also at the time, it would have been seen as sort of God's punishment for some reason, I suppose, as well. The fact that he was afflicted so constantly.
Yeah. Well, that was the type of man he was. He believed that God was punishing him and he had to overcome it. And, well, he mostly did for years, because he suffered with it throughout his entire life, and he did all these great things while he was in great pain. But I viewed it partially as a mental affliction, because I don't know about you guys, if you have to do like a talk in front of people, you can maybe get really nervous.
Yeah.
And when I was in a band, I used to get so nervous before doing a gig, I would actually be physically sick. You know, just the anxiety would be crippling, basically. But then I would go on stage and it would disappear and I'd be fine.
Yeah.
So I kind of likened Alfred to that.
Yeah, I noticed that in Sword of the Saxons, there was a bit where he was about to go into battle and his stomach was playing up, but as soon as battle started, that was it. He was fine. And I can see that. Yeah, it's all the nervous energy built up.
Yeah.
I think it's probably stage fright, basically. You know, because I'm a big music fan, a musician and stuff like that. So that's always comes back to that for me. If you listen to interviews with even huge bands like Guns N' Roses or Def Leppard or something like that, still say they get nervous before they go on stage. But once they get out there in front of this huge crowd, the nerves disappear, and, you know, and they own the stage and they're running around looking like they're having the time of their lives. So I don't see why it'd be any different for someone like Alfred. It's the same kind of feelings.
And I guess it could be related to the constant weight of responsibility that he felt.
Definitely.
And that when you were in a battle situation, that disappears because your main concern is staying alive and, you know, sort of winning the battle.
Well, it gets the aggression out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And your feelings of being trapped or anxious, nervous, you know, you've now got an outlet for them instead of just sitting there within yourself, feeling it, you know, panic attack type thing. You've now got someone to kill, basically. You've got a whole field full of people and a spear in your hand to take it out on. So, I think that's what was probably going on.
And that might be why Bishop Asser put it in the Chronicles as well, because it might show weakness in a king, but also the fact that he still fought and still beat back the Vikings, actually, while suffering from a debilitating illness, shows a strength of character.
Definitely, yeah.
Shows how much Alfred overcame in order to achieve what he achieved.
Yeah, I think definitely that's because that is a type of propaganda. Yes, he did have this terrible illness, but he managed to overcome it.
Yeah.
And how many other men would be able to do that? He was obviously strong enough and deserving of you know, the followers and the loyalty
Yeah.
of his eldermen and his thanes, which,
Yeah.
you know, he did seem to have.
Well, I guess what counted with those guys was what happened in a battle more than anything else.
Yeah.
Because it was that kind of period, wasn't it, where you followed somebody that you thought gave you a really good chance of survival
Yeah.
and gaining victories, because the opposite was not worth thinking about.
Well, that's it. If you've got all these strong soldiers looking to you for leadership and you're a coward or you're not very good at fighting, you know, and you're maybe getting battered left, right, and centre, why would they follow you?
Yeah, exactly.
Like you said, Eric, it was that type of period where might is right, basically.
Yeah.
So I understand totally why Bernard Cornwell did what he did with Alfred in the books, because, you know, he wasn't writing a trilogy. He was always wanted to write 10 books, I believe. So you had to have other characters that could take the reins. But I think people need to look closer at the history to find out what the real Alfred was like, or just read my books.
Of course, yeah. Best way in.
I should just point out, by the way, just before we go on, I should have said this at the start. I finished that trilogy like back in July or something, and I've since written the Warrior Druid novel, and I'm now just finishing off a Forest Lord novella. So the events in these Alfred books are not very fresh in my mind. So there's certain things that I don't really remember, because I'm like Homer Simpson, you know, stuff comes in and the old stuff goes out my brain. So forgive me if I don't remember dates and people's names the way I should.
Well, I think that's true of all of us, you know.
It's okay. It took me a while to remember Bishop Astor. I knew he was a bishop, but I couldn't remember his name.
Exactly. Well, that's it. If you're not sitting writing a book about that stuff, you don't need it in your brain, do you? So
it's gone. You're on to the next thing, really, aren't you? Yeah. Because if you did try and keep all that in your head, it'd be crammed.
Well, you'd end up making mistakes, because actually...
Well, that's it. And it ends up feeding into your next book, doesn't it? So you can't...
Especially with the Warrior Druid books, have got Arthur in them. So one of the Alfred books, I actually call them Arthur. By mistake. Nobody caught it, and it's actually in the paperback. And I had to go on to the publishers and say, oh no, you need to fix this. I've called Alfred Arthur. So I thought, oh God, I'll have to make sure I never do that again. And then The Vengeance of Merlin comes out, and somebody's left a review saying he calls Arthur Alfred in this. And I did at one part. I've done it again, but the opposite way around.
It's so easy, though. It's so
but in a way,
easy.
we're
novelists, aren't we?
Doesn't it make it realistic? Because we all do it. I called you Matthew.
I suppose.
I know you're Stephen.
Aye. I know. Aye, but there's always somebody who'll leave a review, isn't there, and tell you.
Yeah.
A mistake. 3 stars, I called them. It's only one instance. I've fixed it now, but that is embarrassing. But it does make you realise that all this stuff in your head, it's hard to keep track of. Historians, I think somebody like Ian Mortimer absolutely amazes me, because he can keep all these facts in his head, but I can't. So if I get anything wrong, that's why. In this interview, I mean.
You're doing okay as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, I know I write non-fiction, but I have to do, luckily, I have to do an index, and I do it as I go, because in medieval times, spelling wasn't universal. So there's one woman can have 3 different ways to spell her name. So at least if I've got the index done, I can keep an eye on which spellings I've used.
You've used, one of your questions was, what was the biggest challenge writing the Alfred books? And one of the, perhaps even the biggest challenge, was trying to keep track or not overuse all these names that start with AE. Like Alfred, Ethelfled, Ethelred.
There's loads
of them. There was tons and tons of them. And every single book, there would be another one added. So it was so hard to keep track of who was who. And eventually, I realised that it would be better if I just dropped the AE for all of them. Like Alfred, I would just have the A. And certain other ones, it'd even be like the same name for 2 different characters. 2 eldermen would both be called like Ethelred. So the way to differentiate them, I thought, well, one of them will have AE at the start, and one of them will just have E or A.
And what were their parents thinking?
So
what were their parents thinking? I mean, it's ridiculous.
That was ridiculous, I know. I'm sure if they had the internet back then, they wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
In Women of the Anarchy, there were 12 women called Matilda.
Right. So how do you get round that?
One
That's
book. I had 12 different women got Matilda.
you'd have to give them like a second name or something, then, wouldn't you? Matilda, or even numbers, Matilda 1, 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Aye.
But they had no thought for people in the future writing their names down. It was like no consideration whatsoever.
Especially women, because they probably thought nobody was going to bother with a woman.
Yeah, that's true. No one writes about
You were
women
lucky
anyway.
somebody wrote down their
thought them so
name.
unimportant. That's true. Aye. Maybe it wasn't even their real name. Maybe they just made it
Yeah,
up.
did they
Just call her
use Matilda as a general name for women?
Aye.
Well, there were a couple. There were a couple where their names had been changed as
That's
well.
right.
One's like there's
To Matilda.
Yeah.
St Margaret's daughter, Edith of Scotland, changed her name to Matilda when she got married.
Well, I suppose you could call her Edith Matilda.
I should have just numbered them from the beginning, shouldn't I? Number Matilda 1, Matilda
Aye.
2.
Roman numerals
Yeah.
to make it look more important.
Right, so how easy is it to research King Alfred and the period in which he lived?
It was easy enough. Let me put it that way. Because there is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and Asser. And like I said, there was so many things happened in Alfred's life that was plenty for the trilogy. And we kind of know what the period was like in terms of like technology and the political background and, you know, things like that. What the buildings were like, what the clothes were like. We know all that kind of stuff. So it was fairly easy to research. I think if it had been any easier, it would have made my job harder because then people can come in and go, oh, he's got all this wrong.
Yeah.
Whereas I was able to get everything I needed.
Yeah, wasn't it Alfred who started the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle? So you owe him thanks for you being able to write his story.
Yeah. And obviously Asser was his biographer as well.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, that there was nothing really before that until Alfred decided to start the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. We don't really know much about any of the previous kings before him because nobody was really writing them down until Alfred. So, yeah, I think Alfred was a good self-publicist. And it's handy for people like me.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first self-publicity.
So
I suppose it is, in a way, it's funny because he was such a good self-publicist, propagandist, and yet most people nowadays know him from Bernard Cornwell's stuff, and he's looked upon as a weakling.
Yeah.
It was really unfair, actually, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think that's the thing. Nobody knows, he's Alfred the Great, but there isn't a written rule as to what gets him the name Great, what gets him that title.
Yeah.
It's usually militarily, but there's no divining. You have to kill this many enemies, win this many battles, and then you get named Great. It's
usually the Victorians.
It's an appellation given by others, isn't it? But there's no qualifications.
Aye, I suppose he's the only one that's called the Great.
Yeah.
In Britain, though, isn't he?
Yeah.
And I suppose to defeat the Vikings, basically, pretty much anyway, was I think reason enough. And then you add in the other stuff like where he was creating these laws that would be the basis for future and getting over his illness, inventing like the lanthorn, and he did other stuff like that.
Yeah,
I think he definitely deserved it, and it's not the kind of thing you could really call yourself and have it stick.
Is it because it was such a long time ago that you can call someone great because you actually don't know an awful lot? Whereas if you look at somebody like Edward III, they might have said, "Oh, well, Edward the Great. Oh no, he wasn't great. I mean, there was this that didn't go well. There was that."
Yeah.
They know more, therefore it's harder to say someone is great because there's some things you've got to offset, perhaps.
Well, that's what I was saying when he asked about the research. How hard was the research? If you've got too much, it does make it harder.
Yeah.
Because you do have these flaws, and people know certain things that they did, and if they don't know all that, then it's easier to make them heroic.
Yeah. So contrast that with Bellicus and how easy or difficult it is to write that. I mean, with Alfred, as you say, you've got this kind of finite amount of information that you do need to refer to and touch on and include.
Yeah.
With Bellicus, you've got a blank sheet of paper, and anything that's known about him, you've already written.
Yeah, that's true.
So how did it compare, the experience how does it compare, the experience of writing one compared to the other?
Well, again, I think I was lucky in that I had just enough to be going on with. And the character traits that Alfred was said to have worked really well as a character in for a novel. You know, like he liked a good drink, he liked women, and he liked a fight. So, I mean, what more do you need?
What else is there to say?
What more do you need for a lead character in a historical trilogy? You know, if he'd been a really boring guy, or if he had different character traits, like, I don't know, he really enjoyed cooking and then enjoyed thatching roofs and houses, like I think King Edward II did stuff like that. That probably would have made it a bit harder, or for me anyway, for the type of books I write, it would have made it a bit harder. It wouldn't have been as much of an adventure novel. But the traits that Alfred was supposed to have were perfect. It's the kind of thing you would probably make up yourself anyway.
Yeah.
So compared to Bellicus, I think Bellicus is a bit more fun because I can make him more like this indestructible, almost 7 foot tall druid who has all this knowledge. He doesn't have quite as many flaws physically or, you know, mentally or emotionally or anything like that. So Bellicus is just great fun to write always. And I can populate that world with other characters who have Alfred's similar kind of flaws, you know, but Bellicus is a bit more stands above them all. And he's got obviously his dogs at his side who are great characters as well, you know. So
Yes.
in terms of writing adventure novels, I think they're both really good characters, but Bellicus is more fun because I can do what I like with them.
Yeah. It's not as restricted, is it?
Yeah, the whole world, not just the character, the whole everything that's happening. You know, I can bring in King Arthur. I've got Roman centurions because that was why I picked that period.
Yeah.
That particular, you know, like 430 AD.
Yeah, it's a great period.
Specifically because I wanted to have Romans, You
could
So I
put
could
virtually
bring in-
anybody in there, really.
Yeah. And the good thing is it's the Dark Ages because we don't know very much about it. So you can't really get people researching it and saying, you got all this wrong.
Yeah.
Although you do still get that anyway.
Yeah.
Well, especially with Arthur as well, because it's all legendary anyway. So it's like we don't even know if he really existed. So you can put him in there and say, well, he might have done it.
Yeah. Why not? Who says he didn't? You know, and if somebody says, well, he never did that, well, how do you know if you get a time machine? It was the same with Robin Hood. You know, I could basically make them do whatever I wanted them to do for the story, to suit the story.
Yeah.
But you would get people saying, oh, they never done that. You just made that up.
Well, that's what you do. You're a novelist. You make things up.
Well, exactly. And if somebody doesn't like it, they can write their own book and make them do what they want in their book.
Well, I think that's very much Bernard Cornwell's attitude, is that if they don't like his book's tough.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only thing you can do. You can only write the book. In fact, since we're speaking about this series, somebody actually left a review for the Heathen Horde. He's a fan of my books, and he left a review that said he didn't really like it because I had started writing like my friend Matthew Harvey. And it annoyed the reviewer because he really liked my unique style. And then the same reviewer read the second book, Sword of the Saxons, and he said, oh, this is so much better. He writes like himself again. And I mean, there's no possible way I could have sat down and written the first book trying to be Matthew. You just can't do it. You know what it's like yourself.
No.
You can only write in your own style. Maybe you could be influenced by other people if that's what you're reading at the time and for your own pleasure or whatever. But I wasn't reading Matthew's books because I think I've only read a couple of them because I just don't have time to read many novels.
Yeah.
But it just shows you that people will always have some criticism, whether it's valid or not, because that's just how readers, we're all the same. You know, we all perceive the books we read differently. So you can only write what you want to write and what flows out of you at that time.
And that's okay. It's okay for different readers to take a different view of your writing.
Yeah, of course.
Because that's what's going to happen. You know, that once you put it out there, it's in the hands of the reader. So, but I mean, as you say, you can only be true to what you want to do, and then it's up to the reader to like it or not like it.
Yeah.
There's a book called, I think it's The Magic in Your Mind. It's a kind of spiritual book, and I was reading that last year, and there was a part in it that really struck me, and it said something along the lines of, it's not even a novelist that's writing the book. You know, where did the ideas come from? is it your idea? Because they just pop into your head, don't they? It's as if they come from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And you're just the conduit for it. So
Yeah.
I think I'm much more relaxed now when I'm writing a book, that I'll maybe think, oh no, I don't think this is very good, but it is what it is. If it's not very good, there's nothing I can do about it. That's just what's flowing out at that point. And I can only hone it and edit it and get it as best as I can. And the thing is, when you publish them, people always say, oh, you know, people that like my books always say, oh, this is probably your best book yet. And it's like, well, okay, I wasn't that keen on it while I was writing it. And it just goes to show, you know, it's totally subjective. You know, people pick up on what they want to pick up on and what they're enjoying at that time.
Speaking of best book yet, I actually think it's Vengeance of Merlin. Well, other than Lucia. Actually, I always exclude Lucia. Vengeance of Merlin is your best book yet, except for Lucia, because I think Lucia is one of the best books ever written, never mind yours.
Well, thanks very much.
I've told you many times what that book did with me, because I was reading Lucia when the British and Americans were pulling out of Afghanistan, and you were looking at women's rights being eroded, and then you've got this female slave in Roman Britain. And it really hit home to see how women and slaves could be have so little control of their own lives. That book is totally different writing to any of your other books. It just had me in tears.
Well, it had me in tears writing it at times as well.
I couldn't imagine.
And especially when you're reading it back, and then you get the lump in your throat when you're reading it, you think, oh, this is great.
It's funny how that happens, isn't it, really? You get into it.
This is really great. If I'm this emotional, people reading it are going to be emotional, and that's what you want, isn't it? But that kind of proves my point, Sharon. That book, it's got like a 4.1 star average rating on Amazon UK, and that's the lowest of any of my books, I believe. So some people would say that's your best book, and yet most people that have read it would say it's not as good as the other ones. You know, it's just it's subjective. It just depends what you're going through in your life at the time when you read it or whatever. And so you can only put the book out and just hope that people enjoy it. You can't really worry about it too much.
Yeah, that's true.
No, I think that's absolutely right. You've got to write what you think is okay and it works out for you, and then it's out there, and that's the end of it from your point of view, in a sense, isn't it?
Exactly. This whole Alfred trilogy, I mean, it's finished. I don't have anything really to do with it anymore.
Yeah.
The cover art's all been done. It's all up for pre-order. So as far as I'm concerned, it's behind me now. I can only move on.
Yeah.
When the next book comes out, the final book, King of Wessex, I'll probably do some interviews or something for it, or try and get it some publicity, because obviously I want to be paid, you know, nicely when the royalties start to come in. But in terms of my mindset, that trilogy's completely gone now. That's in the past, and I just have to look forward to the future so that I can focus on the research for the Druid books or a new Forest Lord novel, perhaps, you know, things like that.
I think that's something that's hard for people to understand sometimes, because the book's just come out, so it's very fresh in their minds when they've read it. But it's 3 books away. You're editing another book, you're writing another book, and it's like, and you've got to go back to the one you did 3 books ago and talk about it, and it does get a bit confusing.
Yeah,
it's hard to look back at the books, even characters that people will say, well, this character was great, and I'm like, I don't really remember them.
Well, I still get asked about my first book, and I started writing that about 15, 16 years ago, probably.
It's a long time ago.
It is, yeah. You have to move on, don't you?
Yeah. I think there's a piece of software called Eon Timeline.
Yeah.
Things like that are handy, because you can just put down a wee column for each book here and there for all the main events. And that's what I had to do with the Warrior Druid books, because I hadn't written one in 2 years. So I went back and I just noted down everything that happened. And I think if I did that from the start, when I first wrote Wolf's Head in 2013, I would have a much clearer idea of where I was going.
Yeah.
But you don't know that, do you? That's hindsight.
Yeah, I mean, I've used spreadsheets since the first, just after the first one, I think. I used a spreadsheet for every book. And
you were a teacher, though, weren't you?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
you knew.
Mind you, I've always hated spreadsheets, but they are useful. They are useful. And I knew just about enough about a spreadsheet to be able to use them simply.
Well, it's definitely an idea to have like a character list,
Yeah.
at least, at the very least,
Yeah.
in places, so you know you can just look them up quickly.
Well, you'll know from writing long series that if you don't have some record, just remembering basic details about one of your characters, even one of the main characters, you can easily lose it and get the wrong, the wrong eye color, the wrong hair color, the wrong size or whatever,
Yeah,
physical details and even
yeah.
as
Or you could
well,
have like a character having some fingers chopped off, like I've got Euro, the Centurion,
Yeah.
and it's like every time I go to write a new scene with him, it's like, which fingers did he have cut off?
Yeah.
So you really need, you can't remember that kind of stuff constantly. It's not my fingers, it's somebody else's. So you really need
Yeah.
that kind of thing noted down,
Yeah.
along eye colour,
Yeah.
yeah, height, weight, things
Yeah.
like that. Beard
Yeah.
type.
Number of fingers.
Yeah, which ones are missing, what toes have been chopped off.
Order of birth of children. I remember one book I read, I can't remember what it was. The order of birth of the children was changed around about 3 books later.
Right. Aye, well, that was one thing
Yeah.
with Alfred, because there wasn't really that much about his children. There's a list of names of them, and there was some suggestion that they might have lost some children.
Yeah.
So I added stuff like that in, but yeah, it was very hard to keep track of all these children. Again, with 80 names at the start, I think pretty much every one of them had that. So yeah, that was quite difficult.
So who's your favourite character in all the characters you've written about? Who's your favourite character to write?
I like the big guys because I'm not that tall. You've met me. You know that I'm not like enormous or anything. I'm bigger than Matthew Harvey.
You're still taller than me. And everybody is.
Derek's quite big. I was surprised actually how tall he is. Even you, Derek. Most men probably think, oh, it'd be great to be like 6.5 foot tall, and just stride around being this big tough guy. So I like characters like Bellicus, who's supposed to be over 6.5 feet tall. Little John in my Forest Lord novels, because again he's like 6'4", 6'5" or something. I think he's huge as well, built like a tank. And then Wulfric in the Alfred trilogy is another one I added. He was more like my Alfred style character, where he would go off on missions for Alfred. He's another big hard man. So those three are probably my favourite characters for those reasons that they're.
So they're you, just taller.
Well, an idealised version of me, taller, harder, better looking, all that kind of stuff. Younger, I think, most of them. But they're the characters that are fun to write.
So, and Bellicus's dog, Kai. Is it Kai or Kay?
Kai, yeah.
Kai.
Yeah, actually, that was another. Sorry, that was another problem, because obviously there's a Kai or a K in the Arthurian legend. So when I brought that character in, I thought, oh, he can't be Kai. The dog's Kai. So I had to start calling him K. So that's why he's called Kay. In the books, it's all very confusing. In real life, nobody cares about stuff like that. But we have to keep it simple for the readers. But yeah, the dog is called Kai.
I like Kai.
Dogs make really good characters, actually.
They do.
Well, that's, yeah. And if anything happens to them, that's another part where you're reading it and your tears are welling up. Oh no, the dog's died.
Yeah.
And it's really emotional. If a person dies, who cares? But if the dog gets it, then it's and then you're getting emails from people. How dare you? How could you do that to that dog? It's quite an easy way actually to get an emotional reaction from people. I think I've only done it once or twice.
Yeah, I've done it a couple of times, I think. But yeah. So what is next then for you? What's coming out next? Well, you mentioned the third Alfred book is coming out. Is that the next thing coming out for you?
No, that'll be out in February 20th. I think it is. King of Wessex, it's called.
Right.
But before that, again, I'm writing another winter novella, like I usually try and do.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So this one's called The Heretic of Halton Price Priory.
That's a long title.
I know, and I thought that's too long, because anytime I would pitch titles to Canelo for the Alfred series, they would say things like, no, that's far too long, you can't have that in the cover. So when I came up with the title for this, I thought, you know what? I'm not doing it for a publisher. I'm
Yeah.
self-publishing this. I can call it whatever the hell I like. And I like that. I like that title, so I don't care how long it is. And the kind of trend nowadays for book covers is to have a small image anyway. It's not
Yeah.
like the old days where you had a
Yeah.
huge Roman soldier
Yeah.
or something. You know, it's usually the
Mm.
title's big, the name's big. So
Yeah.
I thought I like the title. There's a bit of alliteration in it. So
Mm.
I just thought I would go with that. But it was supposed to be about 20,000 words. But I've got carried away and it's 46,000 words so far. And that's me just started to edit it. So I was hoping it'd be finished like 2 or 3 weeks
Yeah.
ago, and it just kept going and kept going. And there's a right twist at the end that I'm still not sure I should put in.
I'll put it in.
I'll maybe tell you when we stop recording. Well, I think I probably will, because otherwise it's not quite a happy ending, and I like a happy
Yeah.
ending. Yeah, so it's set at winter, and it's a bit more of a creepy ghost story than
Mm.
some of the recent ones have been. It's a bit some ideas from H.P. Lovecraft in it, but still medieval times with Friar Tuck and Will Scarlet and Little John, wee bit of humour in it.
Yeah.
And again, you know, I've really enjoyed writing it. When I publish it, hopefully in early middle of November, I'm going to package it with the story I gave away to my email list subscribers last year for free.
Right.
That was called The Christmas Hunt. And again, that was about 12,000 words. It was supposed to be about 5,000 words, because I knew I would be giving it away for free,
Yeah.
and I get carried away again. So, you know, a total of about 60,000 words for people to read
Yeah.
in the run up to
How
Christmas.
many novellas have you done now?
I've not really counted them, I think. There must be about 10.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
Not all of them are winter
Mm.
ones. You know, so like Night of the Cross and The Abbey of Death had nothing to do with winter or Christmas or anything like that.
Mm.
I think all the others have. So there must be about 10-ish at this point.
You could do a compilation. Put them
Yeah.
out as a compilation. The Friar Tuck Mysteries.
Aye, I have always kind of thought of doing something like that, but like, as I said, Abbey of Death and Night of the Cross don't really tie in with that. So
Mm.
I don't know. I think, you know, if you've got Kindle Unlimited, you can read all of them for free anyway. So I don't know
Yeah.
if there's a
Yeah.
need for a
Yeah.
kind of compilation, but maybe one day I will, because people do like the paperbacks.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's one reason why I'm putting out the one I gave away for free last year, the Christmas Hunt. It would be too thin for a paperback. So I thought, well, I'll just package it with this Halton Price Priory one,
Mm.
and that'll make a nice package paperback for people that like the paperbacks. I don't sell many paperbacks, to be perfectly honest, but you want to please every reader. So if people don't like the Kindle, then I'd rather they enjoyed a paperback.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, it has been absolutely wonderful talking with you again, Stephen. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
And you do know more about King Alfred than you think you do.
Yeah, well, that's it. It seemed strangely fresh in my mind. I don't know why. I've written an entire novel and a novella since that series, but
Mm.
eventually it'll fade over time, won't it? If you interviewed me in February about King of Wessex, I'd probably have no idea what had happened in the book, apart from the stuff I made up.
I think the other problem is when you've written, like, we're talking to you because we've read Heathen Horde and Sword of the Saxons. So you're trying not to put anything in from King of Wessex because we haven't read that yet.
Well, that's it. It all blurs into one, though, doesn't it? If you've got a
Yeah.
series,
Yeah.
you're not really sure what happened in the third book.
Well, it's been lovely talking to you.
Yeah, you too, guys. Thanks very much for having me on again. The chance to promote the books.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you very much to Steven A McKay. Do get a hold of the Heathen Horde and the Sword of the Saxons, his King Alfred books. I highly recommend them. Do join us next time when we have a very special guest in Dr. Ian Mortimer. I've been Sharon Bennett Connolly.
And I'm Derek Birks. Thanks for listening. And do subscribe to avoid missing a podcast. If you enjoyed it, perhaps give it a like. We'd love to have a rating or a review from you. Join us next time.